A rebasing of Nigeria's GDP to $1.5 trillion is due, says an expert economist, businessman and investor. What is the economic rationale underpinning his position? Good morning. It's another power-packed episode of Business Week. Today, the World Bank approves a $2.2 billion loan to Nigeria. Afrexim Bank champions African-Caribbean economic ties, and Singapore-based conglomerate Tolaram places a new investment bet on Nigeria's alcoholic beverage industry with a strategic acquisition, while an expert tells us why Nigeria's GDP is much, and I mean much bigger than it appears. I'm here to help you catch up as always. If you couldn't keep up, I'm Rolake Akikugbe-Filani. As always, I'm going to start with a look at global oil and gas commodities, starting with Brent. Brent was up at the last day of trading on Friday, up by 0.02% to $82.77 per barrel. Good news there, obviously, for producers, and what is causing that is the OPEC and the US Energy Information Administration are predicting fairly robust energy demand in the coming months. So good news, but in the North American market, consumer sentiment a bit weak. So we saw WTI down there at the end of trading by 0.09%. Natural gas also down, mostly driven by the North American market. RBOB gasoline stayed flat. Let's take a look at global equities around the world, starting, of course, with the stock markets in Nigeria. 56.52 trillion naira mark. That hasn't really moved over my last 3 or 4 reporting cycles, but the all share index ended the week at 99,925.29, up slightly muted by 0.9%, a fair amount in terms of values and volumes of deals, but not a massively exciting end of the week to the NGS. Let's take a look at what else is happening across the African continent. And we always like to look at Nairobi, Johannesburg, Ghana, Accra, Morocco, starting with Johannesburg. Positive end to the week on the GSC. South African investors and traders obviously thinking of a return to relatively political calm following the formation of the unity government between the ANC and the Democratic Alliance in that country. In Accra, the stock exchange ended the week down by 17 basis points. Nairobi was up, but Morocco in Casablanca was down by 20 points. Let's take a look at Wall Street. Now, this is an interesting one. I talked about US consumer sentiment, not so robust, and the market's still trying to weigh what the Fed will do in terms of rate cuts. Yes, inflation is slowing down, but there's still concerns around the overheating economy. So the Dow Jones Industrial was down by 25 basis points, S&P down by 20 basis points, and NASDAQ Composite down a bit less than the others by 0.06%. I'd like to take a look at my top picks from around the world. Good news here for Nigeria, because despite UK firm Diageo divesting its 58% stake, Singapore-based Tolaram Group, producers of Indomie noodles, which we all love across the country, is acquiring that 58% stake for an estimated $70 million. That's about 81 naira per share. It doesn't mean Guinness is going to stop producing. If anything, this deal is kicking off in 2025, and the new owners, the majority owners with a 58% stake, Tolaram, will continue to produce the ready-to-consume drinks and the alcoholic beverages of Guinness in Nigeria. That deal obviously doesn't kick in until another couple of years, but Tolaram is also a big investor in the Lekki deep sea port. So good news there for Nigeria, because we've been hearing a lot of news about investors leaving, but this is one investor who's placed a long-term bet on the Nigerian economy. And speaking of the Nigerian economy, the World Bank has approved a $2.25 billion loan for the Tinubu administration. Now, this is big news in this market. Why is it big news? Because about $1.5 billion of that loan will help to accelerate the government's economic reforms, and the remaining $750 million will help with revenue mobilization. Now, this is an endorsement of the government's push to institute macroeconomic reforms since a year ago when President Bola Tinubu came into power. The World Bank is essentially acknowledging, by approving this loan, that the government's reforms are moving in the right direction. Much needed liquidity for the Nigerian economy, so good news for the government there. MultiChoice, unfortunately, has recorded a net loss of $225 million. And Nigeria is in the eye of that storm. We've seen subscribers down for DSTV and MultiChoice by 18%. And in fact, across Africa, Premium subscribers for MultiChoice are down by 8%. In fact, Nigerian subscribers fell by 1.2 million subscribers from 9.3 to 8.1. And this is really because we've been seeing an erosion in purchasing power for many consumers on the continent. South Africa has also been impacted with subscriptions down in that market on the back of load shedding. Elsewhere in emerging markets, the IMF, under its $44 billion rescue package for the Argentinian economy, has approved another $800 million loan for that economy. Of course, right-wing President Javier Milei has been in power for almost 9 months now. He's been pushing quite a lot of macroeconomic reforms, including currency devaluation, trying to curb inflation, which at the last read in Argentina was at 289%, although that did moderate in May. So good news there again for Argentina, receiving money from a Bretton Woods institution. And finally, Russia. In the eye of the big global storm, the G7 has finally approved a $50 billion loan to Ukraine, leveraging seized Russian assets. And in fact, Russia has stopped trading Forex on its Moscow exchange, which is affecting the value of the ruble. US sanctions are biting in that economy, and countries like China and Turkey who still do business in Russia may struggle to trade into that market. And in fact, since Russia halted Forex trading on its Moscow exchange, we're seeing the value of the ruble drop by 3 to 5%. That's it for my topics for the week. Well, in other news from around the world, heads of states, ministers, government officials, and renowned captains of industry were among the over 2,000 delegates that attended the 31st African Export-Import Bank annual meetings held in Nassau in the Bahamas that began on the 12th of June. Themed Owning Our Destiny, Economic Prosperity on the Platform of Global Africa, the meetings have called for a strengthening of the linkages between Africa and the Caribbean, the sixth region of the African Union. These meetings are considered crucial for economic decision makers in Africa and the Caribbean and are covered by the African, Caribbean, and international media. Nigeria's oil output witnessed a decline in May, dipping to 1.25 million barrels, according to data from OPEC. This represents a drop from previous months, raising concerns about the nation's oil production capacity. The decline comes after a brief recovery period in April, where production rose to 1.28 million barrels a day after a slump in March. While OPEC, relying on information from Nigerian authorities, reports 1.25 million barrels a day, secondary sources suggest a higher output of 1.42 million barrels in May. Well, 5 months after a Delaware court ordered Tesla to revoke CEO Elon Musk's massive 2018 compensation plan, citing illegal board approval, shareholders of the firm voted on Thursday to approve it. On the other hand, Norwegian's sovereign wealth fund, $1.7 trillion worth of assets under management, had on 8th of June said it would vote against approving Tesla CEO's $56 billion pay package. The pay package went to a shareholder vote after it was voided by a judge earlier this year after being approved in 2018. Musk's pay package was deemed unfair to shareholders by the judge, who labeled it an unfathomable sum. Japan's economy contracted less than initially reported in January to March on upward revisions. GDP shrank a revised 1.8% annualized in the first quarter from the previous 3 months, Cabinet Office data showed. A smaller decline than economists anticipated was forecast, and a 2% decline in the preliminary estimate was also published. Analysts expect the Japanese economy to have bottomed out in the first 3 months of the year, although a stubbornly weak yen and disruptions at major automaker plants continue to cloud the outlook for the current quarter. On tech, Apple recaptured its status as the world's most valuable company on Wednesday, beating Microsoft as the iPhone maker pushed ahead in the fight to dominate AI technology. Apple's stock jumped nearly 4% to a record $215, bringing its market capitalization to $3.29 trillion. In contrast, Microsoft's market value was $3.24 trillion, marking the first time in 5 months that it trailed Apple. This market rally coincides with a tech-heavy Nasdaq reaching a new high, aided by hints of slowing inflation. In Nigeria, governor of the nation's commercial capital, Lagos, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, has said that the GDP of the state in the last 5 years under his administration has risen by almost 50%, surpassing the size of the GDP of over 40 African countries. The governor said economic prosperity recorded by Lagos State over the last 20 years had shown the strength and potential that subnational governments could offer in shaping the African growth narrative. He told the 31st Afreximbank meetings in the Bahamas that with a strong focus on internal revenue generation and strategic partnerships with the central government and private investors, the state had demonstrated how a focused leadership at subnational level could rework a nation's economic vision to create a sustainable growth pathway for Africa. Access Bank PLC has announced the successful completion of its acquisition of African Banking Corporation Limited in Tanzania. The milestone, it said, followed the initial announcement in July 2023. Access Bank noted that following the acquisition, Bank ABC Tanzania's operations will be integrated with the consumer, private and business banking operations of Standard Chartered Bank Tanzania. The merger, it stressed, will result in the formation of a new entity, Access Bank Tanzania. Still in Africa, Ghana's monthly inflation rate soared to a 10-month high in May as a sharp slump in the cedi led to a surge in the cost of non-food items. Prices rose 3.2% last month, the most since July, according to Samuel Kobina Anim, the government statistician. He told reporters in Accra on Wednesday that the annual inflation rate fell to 23.1% from 25% in April due to favorable base effects. Well, that's it for our top global stories.